Hey you, welcome to the Grey Talks podcast. Talks about grey thinking, social skills, communication, personal development and team coaching. Because in a world that is black and white, we can all use some grey. My name is Lisette van Putten and I will be having these talks with you. I'm a social skills teacher and coach and I will be sharing my thoughts, knowledge and practical tips to create your own greatness. So stay tuned and enjoy this brand new episode. Are you ready? I'm ready. Let's go. Welcome to this episode of the Grey Talks podcast. Episode number 3. I am ready to talk to you about perfectionism because I think in this current world, we are always on edge and always focused on being better, greater, faster, prettier. Everything has to be more and has to be perfect. And I want to talk about that because perfectionism is something that I know a lot about. And I think a lot of people struggle with perfectionism as well. So I think it's a good idea to have a little talk about that. So we're gonna discuss what perfectionism actually is, why I am talking about perfectionism, because who am I? And the qualities that are behind perfectionism and how you can, if you are struggling with perfectionism, how you can actually deal with that. Because let's face it, perfectionism is just striving to be perfect. It's striving to perfection, like striving for perfection, which you can say, is that a bad thing or a good thing? I do hope you comment and let me know what you think, if perfectionism is a bad thing or a good thing. After you're done listening to this episode, you might have the same opinion or a different opinion, so please do share your thoughts with me. Because if we're striving for perfection, my first question would be, who decides what is perfect? So who decides when you actually hit that perfect 10 or that A plus or that 100%? Like, who is the judge of that? And also, who is saying that anything less than a 10 or an A plus or that 100% is not good enough? So who decides about that? And I think it already starts when we go to school. So it starts from a young age where we actually are brought up with the idea that we have to perform to actually be judged and scored. So that is the A plus, the 10, the 100%. And if we don't get that, the first thing that we hear is, oh, better luck next time. You have to practice more. You have to study harder, or you have to. So you actually have to adjust, get better, because you have to do that. So we are used to having that idea in our system when we are performing or when we working or we studying. So there's always that type of perfection that is is something that is sort of like demanded from us when we are in school. I think that is when it can go two ways. When you hear that you have to work harder, be better, um, because you have to score a higher score next time, you either go and work harder and you go study your ass off and you just make sure that you hit that perfect A plus next time, or you don't, because maybe you already did study hard and you already did your best, and someone is telling you that you have to perform better because the score wasn't high enough or good enough. um and that is actually, yeah, it's just demotivating you, and you will stop studying or stop doing the work, putting in the work, you start procrastinating. So I think that are two possible ways it can go. And that's also something that you see when struggling with perfectionism, because sometimes you either go in overdrive, so you're going to check everything, review, reread over and over and over again, checking your grammar from your study, like your papers, your work, your things, everything has to be checked. You're checking your calendar, you're rechecking, making sure everybody has all the information. That's like working in overdrive, so you're going to work harder. Or perfectionism can also result in procrastination and in like numbing, because why should I start right now? I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. Who says that I am going to be able to do it this time or going to be able to do it better? Um, so why start at all? So that those are possible ways of perfectionism to actually show, and it can also be a combination, and you can go back and forth in those both ways. Um, and there's a way of looking at perfectionism where you say it's either a healthy form of perfectionism or a toxic, unhealthy part. Because striving for perfection, being motivated, being goal oriented, checking your grammar or reviewing a paper or making sure everybody has all the information isn't a bad thing. I mean, it's okay to check your phone to make sure, like, oh, what time do I have an appointment tomorrow? There's nothing wrong with that. But rechecking, being already ready for bed, or even being in bed, having to go out of bed to make sure, like, what time is it again? Going over and over and over, making sure everything is okay, reading things until 3 a.m. Is, I would say, is an unhealthy way um, of striving for perfection. And you can also say it's not a bad thing to take your time for things and to maybe relax a little bit before you start working, and first create like a clear image in your head, or making sure you know everything there is to know to start the work that you need to do. However, we can also procrastinate and not starting at all. Um, Sometimes even miss deadlines or ask for an extension of the deadline just because we are afraid to start, because we don't know where to start, because we are afraid to fail, um, or we are afraid to just get stuck in like the work. Maybe it's even more work than we thought it was. So we're creating bigger things in our like we are creating this image in our head that the work is like really 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 tough and hard, and it takes more time, which eventually it will, because we procrastinated, so we don't have a lot of time. So if it actually takes more time, then it's the self-fulfilling prophecy just right there. When we say something might happen, um, it's just self-fulfilling, so it happens. Okay, so we have perfectionism, which means striving for perfection, which isn't always a bad thing, because it can keep you motivated, it can keep you focused, um, it can make sure that you actually get to like achieve your goals. However, it can also result into either going into overdrive and doing a lot of things over and over and over again, reviewing everything there that you think needs reviewing, or it actually happens to slow you down, make you feel a little bit numb, and start procrastinating. So that's in short how you can explain perfectionism from a healthy point of view and like a more toxic point of view. So why am I talking about perfectionism? I mean, who made me the expert of perfectionism? Well, now today I can actually say I'm a proud perfectionist. Um, but I have been struggling a lot with perfectionism. And in the beginning of my time in school, it really helped me. I was motivated. I did the work. I enjoyed reviewing things just to make sure that I did well. Um, but I was already experiencing a few things where I didn't really know what was going on, but I had to do it a certain way. And if it wasn't like that, I was just really, really upset. Okay, so I have this story where back then I didn't know that it was like perfectionism I was struggling with, but now, like later, when I started thinking about it, I realized that it was definitely perfectionism. I think I was like 7, 8, maybe, and I really wanted to write the lyrics of a song on this pretty piece of paper that I had. But I was struggling with like the lettering, and I thought it was like wrong. It was not nice. It didn't look good. So I was like starting over and over and over again, but I didn't have enough of the papers left. So I got really upset with myself. And I remember my sister was coming in my room, and she was like asking me like, "Hey, why are you so upset? What's going on?" And I explained like I really want to write these lyrics on this paper. Don't ask me why I really wanted to write those lyrics, because um I was copying them. So I don't know. I just wanted it to look pretty, I think, I guess. And I told my sister, and she offered to help me and to write those lyrics. Which actually, I was okay with that, because I really thought my sister's handwriting was pretty. So I thought, okay, if you do it, then it's okay. Every time I tell this story, I think it's a little bit a little bit weird, but because I didn't like, I can't remember why I wanted to write those lyrics. And I was perfectly fine with my sister writing them. And I think I've never ever looked at those lyrics afterwards, but in the moment it was really important, and it had to be done, and it had to be really pretty and perfect, and I wasn't able to do that. And that was like, I was struggling with that. So I think that is one of the first struggles that I experienced when it comes to perfectionism. However, afterwards in school, it was fine. I was like motivated. I was eager. I was goal oriented. I like all the healthy parts of perfectionism were helping me. But when I started university, it got I yeah, it got tough. Um, Things didn't really go the way I was used to. When I studied, things came easy, but in university, like during my masters, it didn't at all. Um, so I actually really struggled with the fact that things weren't going perfect, and they weren't going great, and I thought that that was the way it was supposed to be, because that was my experience for the past years during my previous studies. So I was really struggling with that. But the stress and the anxiety and the fear of failure actually led me to therapy, and I was able to start like dealing with my perfectionism, because I realized it wasn't only affecting my studies, but I actually had this struggle with perfectionism like throughout other parts of my life as well. So yeah, I actually started therapy and started reading up on perfectionism. Being a perfectionist, I started to be really invested in perfectionism and wanted to know everything about it. Um, which you can also say, is that a healthy way of coping with being a perfectionist? However, it definitely helped understanding perfectionism more, like the whole healthy, unhealthy part. The fact that there are qualities behind perfectionism, and that is one of the things that helped me the most, and that I use in my workshops and my coaching as well, is where you start to sort of like retrace your steps away from the stress and the way perfectionism shows, back to the qualities that are behind all of that. For instance, one of the things that I noticed was that I have to do all these things. I must do everything. And it is me being like overly driven. But the quality that is behind it is that I am actually very precise when it comes to certain things. So that is the quality, but I forgot all about that because I was so focused on getting everything done. So going into that overdrive. Another way, another thing is I noticed that I was lacking focus. I didn't know where to start, which is the part of the procrastination that I experienced, can can still experience. Like my quality behind lack of focus is that I am very creative and I think of new ways of doing things and ideas while I'm actually working, which is can be really annoying because because you lose focus. But being creative is a good thing. So focusing on the unhealthy part, lack of focus, I can lose everything. But if I lose my, like, I can lose myself completely. But if I focus on the quality, being creative and giving myself a certain time frame in which I can brainstorm, come up with ideas, and then I actually have to lock it in. That's a way of dealing with it for me. So I give myself a time frame in which I'm allowed to, like, lose focus, don't have any focus because I'm just brainstorming. But then I do force myself to make a decision. So if it comes to something that I'm working on and it's about maybe about layout or for this for instance for this podcast, the reels and the stories and the shorts that I use, I gave myself the time frame of the first reel that I was editing to just try out some stuff on how I wanted to do it. But then I told myself, okay, after the first one is done, that is the format that I will be using. That's the setup. Um, so for me, it's important to look at the quality behind perfectionism. And if you are struggling with perfectionism, it might be something interesting to figure out. So think about the way your perfectionism is showing. So, is it you being insecure? Is it about lack of focus? Is it about going into overdrive? Like, what is it? And try to retrace your steps in that and think of the qualities that are actually behind that, and try to go back to that. Because when we're really stressed, we're going to do something that we're really, really good at, which is a quality. But if we're stressed, we're going to do that a lot. So I am really good in creating overviews and planning things. I'm really good at it. If I'm really stressed, I am going to go in overdrive and start planning, making to-do list of my to-do lists and creating an overview for all the things that I have to do, and then I'm creating an overview for a smaller section, and so I just lose myself into planning everything. Um, so when we're stressed, we're going to do too much of what we're really good at. So what we want to know is what it is that we're really good at. That we're already aware of the fact that, hey, when I'm stressed, I am going to do this and this and that because that is something that I use to cope with and deal with the stress. But which normally leads to me going into overdrive or going into like this whole procrastination thing where I binge watch a bunch of Netflix shows. But we want to retrace those steps and actually prevent that from happening. So that is a possible way of dealing with perfectionism, just to get started, because there might be a whole lot to it. It's not something we can fix straight away with one exercise, but it is a start if we become aware of what it is that we're doing, and what it is that sort of like triggers that perfectionism. So I think it can be really interesting to check that out. one of the other things that really helped me with dealing with perfectionism is when I read the quote, perfect is a 7 letter word that shouldn't exist because it's not real. And I don't know if you also have that, but sometimes when I read something or I see something or I have this certain conversation with someone, it just hits me. And it might have been a quote that I already realized on some level because when I read it, it was like, yeah, it sounds right. But when I read it that one time, it just hit me. It was like, yeah, because who decides what is perfect, and how can we actually capture perfect? Because what is perfect for me is not perfect for the other person. So how can we actually talk about perfect and perfection if it it doesn't exist? So it just hit me, and then it sort of started evolving into this whole realization, like, oh, but who is judging um, whether or not something is perfect? And that's when I also realized that the whole judging about yourself and criticizing is something that is playing a really, really big role in this whole perfectionism thing and also personal development. But I think it's better to do another episode about this topic, about the circles of judgment. We will talk about you judging about yourself, criticizing about yourself, you judging and criticizing others, and also thinking that others are judging you. So those are the three circles of judgment, but I will do a separate episode about those. So we will have that great talk some other time. But I think this is enough about perfectionism for now. I think we discussed a lot already. Um, Perfectionism, what it is, like striving for perfection, having this healthy and unhealthy way of showing the reason why I am um, actually talking to you about perfectionism right now, but also how to maybe deal with it, being aware of the qualities that are behind perfectionism, your perfectionism, which is totally different than mine. And one of the ways that might help you to deal with perfectionism is to give yourself a time frame and to do certain things. So when you are aware of your quality and what happens when you're stressed and how it shows when you're like going in either overdrive or procrastination, giving yourself a time frame to actually do that can be really helpful because you set a boundary, you set a limitation to how long you are allowed to do it, and then go back to that quality, that thing that you're really good at, and use that in whatever it is that you are supposed to do, when it's study, when it's something work related, or maybe an event within like your personal life. So a time frame can be really helpful. And of course, this episode I will also share my GreyTrigger and GreyTip with you. My GreyTrigger has to do with perfectionism, definitely. The trigger that I have when I actually start black and white thinking, going into that perfectionism, is when it comes to my business. So all the stuff that I do for Think Great definitely triggers my perfectionist. It can be a real struggle, but I do try, as I already said, I do try to add that time frame in which I actually allow myself to go rogue and to just do whatever and be stressed and anxious, and then afterwards it just forces me to snap out of it and go back to that quality, because that is something I know that I can do really well. So I go back to that. But yeah, business stuff definitely triggers me into that black and white thinking that it has to be perfect. It has to be great from the very, very, very first moment. Um, but yeah, so my tip, one of the tip is the one I already shared. So I limit myself just for that period of time that I am allowed to do things. And my second tip would be to just be transparent about it, because you're listening to an episode about perfectionism, which has been edited for sure. I mean, I struggled just putting words into sentences, and actually this whole section about this particular part of this tip that I'm sharing, this second one, I restarted it a couple of times. So I just want to be as authentic and real with you about that yes, I do edit my podcasts, but it's just because I want to have a great talk. So it should be a talk, so there should be a certain flow, but I don't want to edit the all the struggles and the ums and whatever, because it just has to be this real me, authentic me. And that is also why I share my bloopers, because that is me. And I want you to get to know me and the real me. And I think when it comes to being a perfectionist and want to do something really good, I think being transparent about that to yourself and also to the person that you might feel like you have to perform in this perfect way for, if it's either a teacher or it's your supervisor at work, or maybe within your friends or family, you feel like you have to look a certain way, or you have to perform a certain way or act a certain way. Just be transparent about that. Thank you for listening to this episode of Great Talks. Please let me know what you think, ask me anything, and spread greatness by sharing these talks with everyone you think needs a little bit more grey. Don't forget to be great until our next Great Talk.